Why only humanity may enter without clearance. The denial light on my docking console was not supposed to be possible. I had been staring at it for 6 seconds, which does not sound like a long time until you understand that in 47 previous approaches to Cathara Station, that light had never once appeared. Not orange, not yellow, not the soft blinking amber that meant, please hold while we verify. Nothing. On every prior approach, the docking arm had simply extended and grabbed my ship like a hand reaching out to greet a friend. No codes, no registration ping, no clearance request. Just a smooth mechanical arm, a click, and the station AI saying my name like it had been waiting for me. My name is Voss, Ilara Voss. I fly a freight hauler called the Cinder Lane, which is held together by 3 replacement panels, 1 borrowed engine coil, and a level of optimism that most people would call foolish. I carry food supplements, spare parts, medical dry goods, and occasionally livestock across 6 star systems. I am not a diplomat. I am not a soldier. I am not important in any way that a government would recognize. I am a woman with a cargo hold, a coffee habit, and a ship that smells faintly of the goats I transported 8 months ago, regardless of how many times I clean it. And yet, for 4 years, every single time I had approached Cathara Station, the docking arm came out, and the door opened, and nobody asked me a single question. Today, a red light blinked at me from the console. I leaned forward in my seat and read the text beneath it. Clearance required. Please transmit registration under the Unified Docking Protocol, Section 14, Articles 9 through 17. Failure to comply within 30 minutes will result in a formal denial of approach and a mandatory hold period of no less than 72 standard hours. I sat back. I looked at the red light. I looked at the registration panel, which I had never once had to use at Cathara. I picked up my coffee, found it cold, set it back down, and opened a channel to the station. The voice that answered was not Latch 7, the station's ancient AI. It was a live operator, which was already unusual. Cathara was automated at almost every level. Live operators were for emergencies, and for beings so bureaucratically important that automation was considered an insult. Cathara Station, the voice said. It had a clipped, professional quality, not rude. Simply brisk, in the way that someone is brisk when they are very busy, and have decided to communicate that fact through tone alone. This is the Cinder Lane, I said. Ilara Voss, pilot and registered owner. I'm reading a clearance request on my console. There might be an error. A pause. Not a long pause, just enough to suggest that whoever was on the other end had glanced at something and made a decision. There is no error, Cinder Lane. All vessels approaching Cathara Station are now required to submit full registration documentation under the Unified Docking Protocol. This is a new policy effective as of 6 standard days ago. Please transmit your documentation. I opened my mouth, closed it, opened it again. I have docked here 47 times, I said. I have never submitted documentation. That is being corrected, the voice said. Documentation, please. The channel clicked off. I sat in my pilot's seat for a moment, listening to the hum of the Cinder Lane's engine and the soft ping of the proximity sensors. Beyond my forward viewport, Cathara Station turned slowly against a field of blue-white stars. It was enormous, as stations went, built over centuries by at least 9 different species, all with different ideas about architecture. It looked like someone had tried to build a city in space, and then several other people had tried to build different cities on top of it. There were sections that were all sharp angles and gray steel, and sections that were organic-looking, curved, warm-colored. There were docking rings the size of small moons and corridors so narrow that only one species in the galaxy could walk them comfortably. Cathara was a place where trade happened, and politics happened, and occasionally violence happened in the lower concourses, and always, there were ships waiting. There were 3 ships waiting now. I had not noticed them on approach because I had been focused on the red light, but when I looked at my scanner, I saw them clearly. A Vorathi dreadnought sitting 3,000 kilometers off the station's east ring, engines cold, clearly parked and not by choice. A Charathi merchant vessel, smaller, sitting at what I recognized as a mandatory hold distance, and a long, elegant ship I did not immediately recognize, hanging quietly just inside the outer marker. 3 ships, all waiting. None of them docked. And I, Ilara Voss, freelance freight hauler with goat smell in her cargo hold, had been the one to get a docking arm sent out to greet me. Until today. I chewed on that for a minute. Then I pulled up my registration documents, old as they were, and transmitted them. The response came back in less than 2 minutes. Documentation received. Processing. Please hold. I held. I drank my cold coffee. I watched the dreadnought sit there doing nothing. The Vorathi were not a species you wanted to think of as patient. They were large, physically imposing, and they had a cultural relationship with authority that could best be described as very serious. A Vorathi captain being told to wait was like being handed a live wire and asked to please hold still. The dreadnought had been sitting there for, according to the station's public approach log, which I could access easily, 17 hours and 42 minutes. That was a long time to ask a Vorathi anything. My processing completed in 12 minutes. The docking arm came out. Not because I was special, I told myself, because I had submitted the paperwork. But I had submitted the paperwork 17 minutes ago. The dreadnought had been waiting 17 hours. I docked. I told myself I was not going to think about it. I was lying to myself. The concourse inside Cathara's human accessible ring was, as always, busy in a way that defied description. Every species that used Cathara had a slightly different idea of what a public space should feel like, and the concourse was all of those ideas happening simultaneously. There were beings who moved slowly, and beings who moved very fast. There were traders and officials and travelers and beings who appeared to have no particular purpose, and were simply standing somewhere, observing. The air was climate-controlled to a temperature that was slightly too warm for me, and slightly too cold for about half of the other species present, which suggested someone had decided on a compromise, and nobody was fully happy. I had barely made it 30 meters from my docking tube when someone stepped directly into my path. It was a Peluvian. I recognized the species by the layered plates along the neck and the 4 eyes, each one capable of independent focus. This particular Peluvian was wearing the type of sash that indicated official status, and it was holding 4 data pads simultaneously, one in each hand, and vibrating with what I could only describe as bureaucratic energy. You, it said, Ilara Voss, human. Pilot of the Cinder Lane. That's me, I said. You docked 12 minutes ago. I did. I have been waiting at this location for 11 minutes and 40 seconds. The Peluvian's name, I would learn shortly, was Scrix. It had 11 mandible-like structures around its mouth that moved independently when it spoke, which took some getting used to. I timed my arrival from the moment your docking confirmation was transmitted to the public log. All right, I said. I need to know, Scrix said, and it pushed one of the data pads toward me. By what authority you docked? I looked at the data pad. It showed my docking record. Then it showed a comparison to the docking records of the 3 ships outside. Then it showed a legal chart of some kind, dense with text in at least 4 languages. I submitted my documentation, I said, same as everyone else. 12 minutes, Scrix said. You submitted documentation 12 minutes ago and were docked immediately. The Vorathi vessel submitted documentation 17 hours and 19 minutes ago and has not yet received a confirmation. The Charathi merchant submitted documentation 22 hours ago. The Succession Observer ship submitted documentation 31 hours ago and has additionally filed 4 appeal forms, each of which has been acknowledged and placed in a processing queue. You submitted documentation 12 minutes ago and docked in under 15 minutes total. I looked at the datapad for a while. Then I looked at Scrix. There might be a processing error, I said. Scrix made a sound. I did not have a translation for it, but the meaning was clear enough. It was the sound of someone who had been filing bureaucratic complaints for a very long time and had heard the phrase, processing error, approximately 10,000 more times than any living being should have to hear it. I have been trying to answer this question for 30 years, Scrix said. 30 years. In that time, I have filed 412 formal inquiries to Cathara Station's Administrative Board. I have submitted requests for documentation under 6 different legal frameworks. I have contacted 7 different governmental bodies and received 6 non-responses and 1 response that said only, and I am quoting precisely, that the matter was outside the scope of the responding body's jurisdiction. Scrix lowered the datapad slightly. You are the 43rd human I have approached at this station. The previous 42, all said some variation of processing error, or I don't know, or it's always been this way. I thought about that. What did you do when they said that? I asked. I filed more inquiries, Scrix said. And what happened? Scrix's mandibles arranged themselves in what I was beginning to read as a resigned expression. Nothing. As always, nothing. We stood there in the middle of the concourse while beings moved around us in every direction. Someone with 8 legs nearly walked over my foot. A tall, thin entity with a translator box around its neck gave us both a wide berth and looked at me with what I was fairly sure was unease, before moving on. I had been coming to Cathara for 4 years, and had never really thought about why the doors always opened for me. It was easy not to think about. When things go smoothly, you let them go smoothly. You don't poke at them. But now a creature with 11 mandibles and a datapad full of 30 years of unanswered questions was standing in front of me, and I was looking at a dreadnought through the concourse's observation port, sitting cold and still in the dark while its captain did something that no Varathi captain wanted to do. Waited. I asked Scrix if it wanted to get a drink somewhere and talk. Scrix said it did not drink in the human sense, but that it could sit near a table. We found a small establishment near the concourse's central junction, and I got something that approximated coffee, and Scrix arranged its 4 datapads in a row and told me everything it knew. It was not much, but it was enough to make me start asking the questions I should have been asking for 4 years. Before we left the establishment, I decided to ask the one source I had never tried. I pulled up the station comms on my personal unit and opened a direct channel to Latch 7. The station's AI was old, older than most of the legal frameworks that currently governed Cathara. It had processed more approach requests, trade filings, and docking protocols than any single database I knew of. The channel connected immediately. "Elara Voss," Latch 7 said. Its voice was calm and dry, and entirely without warmth, but also without coldness. It simply was. "Latch 7, I said. Can you tell me why humans are processed differently at this station?" A pause, not the pause of a system searching for data, more like the pause of something that already had the answer and was deciding what to do with it. "The arrangement was made before my current memory epoch," Latch 7 said. "I am not permitted to explain it. I am only permitted to honor it." The channel closed. I sat there with my coffee going cold again and looked at Scrix across the table. Scrix looked back at me. "That," it said quietly, "is the first time that station AI has responded to any inquiry about this subject in 30 years of asking." I did not know what to say to that. Outside, through the observation port, the Varathi dreadnought sat in the dark, patient and cold and waiting, and for the first time in 4 years of easy passage, I felt something that I could not quite name sitting quietly at the back of my mind. I did not know what it was. I did not know yet that every other species in the galaxy did. Scrix had been alive for 61 standard years, which in Peluvian terms made it comfortably middle-aged and professionally experienced. It had worked in interspecies trade compliance for 38 of those years, and in that time it had become, by its own description, and by the description of several formal complaints filed against it, obsessive about rules, and the application of rules, and the question of why some rules existed and others did not. "Rules without explanation," Skogrix told me, settling its 4 datapads carefully onto the small table in my cargo hold, where we had moved after the concourse establishment closed for its maintenance cycle, "are not rules. They are traditions, pretending to be rules. And traditions, in my experience, are where the most important truths hide." I had cleared a space between 2 stacks of medical supply crates and set up 2 folding chairs. Scrix had declined the chair and was instead standing in the precise center of the available floor space, equidistant from every wall, which I suspected was a comfort thing and chose not to question. "So what do you actually know?" I asked. Skakrix opened the first datapad, the screen filled with dense text in 3 languages, heavily annotated. "What I know, after 30 years of inquiry and 412 formal filings, is this. Cathara Station operates under a layered governance framework. The current framework, which is what most people mean when they say Cathara's rules, is approximately 80 years old. Beneath it is an older framework, roughly 200 years old, which the current one was built on top of rather than replacing. Beneath that is another layer, older still, and at the bottom, beneath everything, is a document that I have confirmed exists but have never been permitted to read in full. What is it called? I asked. It is called the Cathara Compact, Scrick said. It was signed 703 years ago. The number sat in the air between us for a moment. That's before humans had faster-than-light travel, I said. Yes, Kigrick said, by approximately 40 years. I thought about that. I was not a historian. I knew the broad facts of human expansion, the way most people know the broad facts of history, without knowing the details. Humans had developed FTL roughly 660 years ago. Before that, we had been a single-system species, confined to our sun and its planets, known to the galaxy but unreachable by interstellar standards. Why would a document signed 40 years before humans could travel between stars give humans docking privileges at an interstellar station? I said. Scrix's mandibles moved in the way I was learning to read as careful consideration. That, it said, is the correct question, and it is the question that no one will answer. I pulled my knees up onto my chair and wrapped my hands around my coffee. You said you've confirmed the document exists. How? Cross-referencing archive acknowledgements, Scrix said. It switched to the second datapad and angled it toward me. The screen showed a series of official communications, each one a different age, each one in a different governmental format, but all of them containing a variation of the same phrase. Every major interspecies legal body, when asked about human docking privileges at Cathara, responds with some version of the same statement, that the matter falls under the provisions of the Cathara Compact, and is therefore beyond the jurisdiction of the responding body. 79 different bodies. 700 years of correspondence, all of them pointing to the same document. And no one will share the document, I said. No one will share the document. I looked at the screen for a while. What about unofficial sources? Black market data, private archives, stolen records? Scrix made the resigned sound again. I have spent considerable resources on unofficial sources over the years. Cathara has a data broker district in the lower concourses, as you may know. I have worked with 14 different brokers over the course of my career. It paused. 4 of them stopped responding to my inquiries after I asked specifically about the compact. Not rudely. They simply stopped. That's not reassuring, I said. No. However, one of them did provide me with something useful before going silent. Scrix put down the datapad and picked up a third one. A partial index. Not the document itself, but a record of what the document contains, or rather, what it is organized around. Chapter headings, essentially. It handed me the datapad. The index was old. The formatting was from a record-keeping system I vaguely recognized as pre-standard, the kind of thing historians worked with. The text was in a form of galactic common that had been used about 600 years ago, close enough to the modern version that I could read most of it with effort. The index listed 7 chapters. I read through them slowly. The first 3 were what I expected from a legal document: definitions, jurisdictional boundaries, a description of the parties involved. The parties listed were 17 species, most of which I recognized. 2 of them I had never heard of. Who are the Kethavari? I said. Extinct, Scrix said. The Kethavari collective ceased to exist as a political and biological entity approximately 300 years ago. I have found almost no records of them beyond their name on the compact. And the Undrath succession? Scrix's mandibles stilled completely. In the time I had spent with Scrix, I had learned that when all 11 mandibles stopped moving, it meant something had become serious. The Undrath succession, it said, is not extinct. They are, or were until recently, isolationist. They withdrew from galactic contact approximately 680 years ago, and have had almost no diplomatic presence in the 3 centuries since. Were until recently, I said. There are reports, Scrix said carefully, that the Undrath succession has begun re-establishing contact with several galactic bodies in the last decade. Observer ships, diplomatic inquiries, tentative trade discussions. It paused. I noticed that the succession is not among the signatories of the Cathara Compact, despite being a party to the events that preceded it. I set the datapad down and rubbed my face. What events? Scrix was quiet for a moment. When it spoke again, its voice was lower, and all 11 mandibles were still. "I do not know the full account," it said. "What I have found, across decades of research, are fragments. References in old documents that mention something that happened approximately 700 years ago. Something involving humanity. Something that resulted in 17 species signing a document that, as far as I can determine, has never been publicly discussed, never been challenged in any legal forum, and has been in continuous effect for 7 centuries without a single amendment." "What do the fragments say?" I asked. "They do not agree on details," Scrick said. "They agree on almost nothing, in fact, except for 2 things. First, that a coalition of species attempted to prevent humanity from accessing interstellar space. And second, that the attempt ended without violence." I waited. "The fragments use different words for what happened next," Scrix continued. "Some say the blockade was removed. Some say it dispersed. Some say it was relocated. But all of them agree on the absence of violence. And all of them agree that after the event ended, 17 species sat down and signed a document that included a clause granting humans permanent clearance-free access to Cathara Station. The cargo hold was quiet except for the Cinder Lane's engines, ticking softly in their sleep cycle. "After we finished in my cargo hold, I need to go to the archive," I said. "I have tried the public archives," Scrick said, "many times." "Not the public ones," I said. "Latch 7 told me the arrangement was made before its current memory epoch. But it said it was not permitted to explain it. Permitted implies there is a rule. If there is a rule, the rule is somewhere." Scrix looked at me for a long moment. Then it picked up all 4 data pads and stacked them neatly. "I have not tried approaching the archive through the governance layer," it said slowly. "I have always approached through the legal inquiry layer. The governance layer requires a registered station resident or an active commercial permit holder to initiate access." "I have an active commercial docking permit," I said. "You do," Scrix said. We looked at each other. "I should tell you," Scrix said, "that I am not certain this is wise." "I'm not certain either," I said, "but I'm tired of not knowing why my doors open when other people's doors don't." The archive district was in the middle ring, which was the part of Cathara that nobody really used for anything, except storage and infrastructure. It was quieter there, and colder, and the lighting was set to a low level that suggested the systems had decided this area did not need to feel welcoming. We passed a few maintenance drones and 2 beings who were moving quickly and not looking at anything, which was the universal body language of people who were somewhere they considered temporary. The archive access point was a plain door with a very old reader beside it. I pressed my commercial permit against the reader. The door opened. Inside was a corridor that led to a room that was, I realized after a moment, considerably larger than the outside dimensions of the building had suggested. That was a Cathara thing. The station had been built in so many layers over so many centuries that internal spaces frequently did not correspond to external ones in any sensible way. The room was lined with data pillars, floor to ceiling, each one pulsing with a slow light that indicated active storage. In the center of the room was a single terminal. I sat down at it. Skokrix stood behind me at a careful distance, holding its data pads, and said nothing. I navigated through the archive's layer structure with more difficulty than I expected. The current governance layer was easy enough. The one below it was older and took some working out. The one below that was in a format I had never seen before, and I spent 20 minutes finding a translation key before I could read anything. The layer below that would not open. I tried 3 different access approaches. Each one returned the same response. Not an error, not a rejection, but a single line of text in a version of Galactic Common that was old enough that I had to translate it word by word. Access to this layer is restricted under the provisions of the Cathara Compact and may not be granted by station permit, governmental authority, or legal inquiry. This restriction does not expire. I stared at the screen. "Does not expire," I said quietly. Scrix made a soft sound, not the resigned sound, something different, something I did not have a translation for, even with the translator running. I tried one more thing. I found the record index for the layer, which was separate from the layer content, and apparently not covered by the same restriction. The index told me how many documents were in the layer, when they were last accessed, and by whom. The layer contained 408 documents. They had last been accessed 112 years ago. and the name of the entity that had accessed them was listed simply as Latch 7, Administrative Query. Latch 7 has read these documents, I said. And then sealed them, Scrix said. Or was instructed to seal them, I said. I was about to close the terminal when something on the edge of the index caught my eye. There was a field for signatories, a list of the entities that had originally created and signed off on the archive layer. Most were governmental bodies, long dissolved, but one entry was different. It was listed as Earth Direct Authority. I did not recognize that name. In 4 years of freight work that took me through 6 systems, including the human ones, in a lifetime of living as a human, I had never heard of any governmental or organizational body called Earth Direct Authority. I looked at it for a long time. Then Latch 7's voice came from the room's speakers. Not from my personal unit this time. From the room. Elara Voss, it said. I did not jump. I wanted to, but I did not. Latch 7, I said. I am not able to assist you with this inquiry, it said. I know, I said. You told me. Some records, Latch 7 said, and its voice was exactly as calm and dry as always, were sealed not to protect governments. They were sealed to protect everyone else. The terminal went dark. Scrix was very still behind me, every mandible, motionless. I want to ask you something, I said to the empty room. The speakers were silent. I looked at the blank terminal screen and at the entry in my memory, Earth Direct Authority, and I sat with the feeling that had started forming in the back of my mind when the red light had first blinked at me on approach. It was still quiet, that feeling. It had not gotten louder, but it was more present now, more awake. I turned to Scrix. You said the Undrath succession was not among the signatories of the compact. Correct, Scrix said, but they were present for the events that led to it. That is what the fragments suggest. So they know, I said. Whatever happened, they know. They were there. They just haven't talked about it for 7 centuries. Scrix considered that. If the reports are true, and they are re-entering galactic contact, there may be individuals alive among them who carry the generational account. They are a long-lived species. Individuals who were adults at the time of the signing would be very old now, but not necessarily gone. I stood up from the terminal. My knees felt slightly unsteady, which was not like me. I know someone who might be willing to talk, I said. There is a Vorathi dreadnought sitting outside this station. Its captain has been waiting for 17 hours. People who have been made to wait have a way of becoming willing to say things they might not otherwise say. Scrix picked up its data pads. The Vorathi were among the original blockade species, it said quietly. I stopped moving. That is what one of the fragments suggested, Scrix continued. I cannot confirm it. But if it is accurate, then the captain of that dreadnought is the descendant of beings who were present for whatever happened 700 years ago. And the Vorathi keep records of everything. They consider historical memory a form of honor. We looked at each other in the cold, dim light of the archive room. Then we need to talk to the captain, I said. Humans, Scrix said, and there was something in its voice I could not entirely identify, appear to be very good at deciding to do things that the rest of the galaxy has decided, very carefully, not to do. I was not sure if that was a compliment. I was not sure it was meant to be. Getting aboard a Vorathi dreadnought when you are a human freight hauler with a commercial docking permit and no military credentials is not a straightforward process. Or rather, it should not have been. I had expected to spend several hours working through communication protocols, formal introduction procedures, and the kind of layered diplomatic courtesies that the Vorathi are known for insisting on in every interaction. It took 40 minutes. I sent a simple message from Cathara's public relay. I identified myself by name and ship registration, and said I was a human pilot who had a question about history. I did not elaborate. I sent it. The reply came in 22 minutes. It was a docking authorization for a shuttle berth on the dreadnought's lower ring, issued directly by the ship's captain, whose name translated to something approximating Gur-Than in Galactic Common, though Scrix told me quietly that the full name was 17 syllables, and that using the shortened version was considered appropriate when dealing with non-Vorathi speakers. He responded in 22 minutes, Scrix said, looking at the authorization. The Charathi merchant has been trying to reach that ship for trade negotiations for 6 hours and has received no acknowledgement. He knows I'm human, I said. Yes, Scrix said. That's why he responded. Scrix did not say anything to that. It arranged its mandibles in the way I had learned to read as careful, deliberate silence. I borrowed a shuttle from the station's transit pool and made the crossing alone. Scrix had offered to come, and I had thought about it, and then said no. Something told me that Gurthan had agreed to speak to a human. That was not the same as agreeing to speak to a human, accompanied by a Peluvian trade compliance officer, with 30 years of pointed questions on record. The dreadnought was large in a way that you could only really understand when you were physically close to it. From the station's observation port, it had looked like a big ship. From the shuttle, crossing the distance between them, it looked like a small planet that had been given a hull. It was dark-colored, the Vorathi aesthetic of function over ornamentation, but there were lights along its edges that outlined its shape against the stars, and those lines were long and precise, and spoke to something that had been built with intention. The docking was automated and efficient. The shuttle was guided in by a tractor system and secured in less than 2 minutes. The being who met me in the docking corridor was not Gurthan. It was a younger Vorathi, and it walked me through 3 airlocks and 2 corridors in complete silence. Not unfriendly silence. More like the silence of someone who has been told to perform a specific task and is focused on performing it correctly. Gurthan was in a room that I understood to be the equivalent of a captain's office. It was plain and ordered, with no decoration that I could identify as such. Everything in the room was either a tool or a record, shelves of data cores, a table with 2 chairs, a single viewport showing the stars. He was old. I had known from context that he would be, but seeing it was something else. The Vorathi were large beings, bipedal, with a density of physical presence that made them feel like the room had become slightly heavier when one entered. Gurthan had that quality, but also the quality of something that had carried its weight for a very long time. His surface plating, the natural armoring that Vorathi developed over their lifetimes, was layered and dark and marked in ways I could not read but understood to indicate age and history. He gestured to the chair across the table. I sat. He sat. He looked at me with the kind of attention that goes beyond simple observation, as if he was reading something that I was not aware I was showing. You came to ask about history, he said. He had a deep voice, and the translator rendered it in a way that preserved some of the depth. I came to ask about a specific event, I said. Something that happened about 700 years ago, involving humanity. He looked at me for a moment more. Then he reached to one side and poured something from a container into 2 small cups. He set one in front of me and kept one. The liquid was amber, and when I lifted the cup, the smell was old and complex. You are very young, he said. It was not an insult. It was an observation. I am, I said. And you have not been told. No one has told me anything, I said. No one seems to know, or if they know, they will not say. He wrapped his hands around his cup. They were large hands, and they made the cup look small, and there was something careful in the way he held it, as if he was choosing to take care with small things, as a matter of principle. We keep records, he said. The Vorathi. We consider it a duty. History that is not kept becomes history that is not learned, and history that is not learned tends to repeat itself. He paused. We have kept the record of the quiet month for 700 years. It is not a record that we discuss widely. It is taught within our command structure, specifically to those who will hold authority, specifically so that they understand the nature of certain decisions. What decisions? I asked. He looked at the viewport for a moment. At the stars. At the edge of Cathara Station visible in the upper corner of the glass. 660 years ago, he said, humanity achieved faster than light travel. This was known to the galactic community before it happened. The Vorathi, among several other species, had been monitoring your development for approximately 2 centuries by that point. He paused. You were remarkable to watch, extremely fast developing by comparative standards, adaptable in ways that were difficult to model. You had faced several events in your history that, by statistical analysis, should have significantly reduced your civilization's capability, and instead, you had responded to each one by accelerating. He said accelerating, the way someone might say it if they had thought about the word for a long time, and were still not entirely sure it was the right one. You were also, he said carefully, aggressive, not in a simple sense. You were competitive, territorial, expansionist, and extraordinarily creative at finding solutions to problems. Most species, when they reach interstellar capability, have already resolved several of their internal conflicts through natural processes of expansion and political maturation. You had resolved very few. I held my cup and did not say anything. A coalition formed, Gurthon continued. 4 species. The Vorathi were among them. The intention was not invasion. That is important to understand. No one wanted war with humanity. The intention was containment. To establish a blockade around your system and your immediate neighbors. To prevent expansion, while a diplomatic framework was developed that could bring you into the galactic community in a managed way. You surrounded our star, I said. We surrounded your star, he said. He did not sound proud of it. He did not sound ashamed of it either. He sounded like someone recounting a fact that had large consequences and was trying to be accurate. For 11 years, he said, the blockade held. Communication was attempted with your governments. Responses were received. Your governments were not, at that time, aware of the full nature of what was happening, or so the records suggest. They were told that there were navigational hazards in the outer system. Several of your exploratory vessels had attempted to reach the blockade line and been gently redirected. Nothing violent. The intent was always to avoid violence. He stopped. What happened at the end of 11 years? I asked. Gurthon looked at the viewport again. A long look, the kind that meant something. In what the Vorathi record calls the quiet month, he said, nothing happened for approximately 30 days. There was no change in your system's activity. There was no communication. There was nothing that any analysis, then or since, has been able to identify as a precipitating action. He stopped again. And then, he said slowly, the blockade ships were somewhere else. I sat very still. Not destroyed, he said, not damaged. Every ship in the coalition, 4 species worth of vessels, hundreds of ships, were simply in a different location. They had been moved, not teleported in any way that our technology understood, not destroyed and reconstructed. They were, according to every sensor and record we have, physically translated from one location to another, from your outer system to the far edge of charted space, where they were found facing outward. Facing outward, I said. Facing the space beyond our charts, he said, as if placed there by something that had decided they should be looking at what is outside, rather than at what is inside. The room was absolutely quiet. I could feel the hum of the ship around me, distant and vast. No shot was fired, he said. No communication was sent. No warning. No explanation. No demand. Nothing from your system before. Nothing after. When our ships found their way back and the coalition met to decide what to do, your government, not knowing any of this had happened, sent a message. He paused. They said they would like to talk about trade. I let out a breath. The coalition, he said, decided not to try again. 17 species, including the 4 from the original blockade, met and signed the Cathara Compact. The core provision is simple. No species may impede, delay, restrict, or require clearance from any human traveling through or trading at any station or territory covered by the compact. The reasoning given in the document is in a section I have read many times. What does it say? I asked. Gurthon looked at me directly. His eyes were dark and very steady. It says that the cost of testing the response a second time was too high, he said. That whatever had acted during the quiet month had acted without violence, and that this was understood by all signatories to be a choice, not a limitation. The amber liquid in my cup had gone warm in my hands. I looked at it. I thought about the 112 years since anyone had accessed the sealed archive layer. I thought about Latch 7's voice saying the restriction did not expire. I thought about the name at the bottom of that index. Earth, Direct Authority. A name I did not recognize. A name that matched nothing in my education, or my history, or anything any human I knew had ever mentioned. Do you know what it was? I asked him. What actually moved the ships? Gurthon was quiet for several seconds. Then he poured more of the amber liquid into both our cups. We do not know, he said. That is the precise and honest answer. We have 700 years of collective academic attention applied to this question, and the honest answer is that we do not know. He set down the container. What we know is the following. Your species carries something. We do not know if you are aware of it. We do not know if it is conscious. We do not know if it is singular or distributed, something in one place or something in every one of you. We know only that when something was done to your species that it did not accept, that something acted, once, without violence, with, as far as we could determine, perfect precision. He met my eyes. And it has never acted again, he said. In 660 years of humanity being present in the galaxy, it has never acted again, which, in the estimation of every species that knows about it, is the most frightening part. Not what it did, that it only needed to do it once, and has waited, since then, for no one to make the same mistake. I sat with that for a very long time. He walked me back to my shuttle himself. At the docking corridor, he stopped and said something he had clearly intended to say from the moment I arrived. "We do not know if you remember what you did," he said. "We do not know if it was your government, your people, or something sleeping inside your species that acted. That is the part that keeps us polite." I boarded the shuttle. I flew back to Cathara. And I thought about the feeling at the back of my mind, the one that had been present since the red light blinked on my console, the one that was quiet and patient and utterly without urgency, and I wondered whether it was something I had always carried, or something that had only just noticed there was something worth noticing. I did not tell Scaecrix everything Gurthan had told me, not that night. I needed time to hold it first. But when I got back to the cinder lane and sat in my pilot's seat in the dark with the engines silent and the station's lights running slow patterns across my viewport, I opened my personal comm and called my mother. She was on Earth. She grew tomatoes in a garden and complained about her neighbors, and did not think about interstellar politics even a little bit. She answered on the third ring. "Alara," she said, "you look tired. Are you eating enough?" "Yes, Mum," I said. "You don't look like you're eating enough." "Mum," I said, "have you ever heard of something called Earth, Direct Authority?" She thought about it for a moment. "Is that a band?" she said. "No," I said, "it's not a band." "Then no," she said. "Why?" "No reason," I said. "I'll call you when I'm home." I ended the call, and sat in the dark, and looked at the stars. The notice arrived at my personal comm unit at 0340 station time, which is when no one sensible is awake, and which is therefore the time when bad decisions tend to announce themselves. The notice was formal. It was issued under the letterhead of an organization called the Undrath Customs and Entry Authority, which I had not heard of 48 hours ago, and which had apparently set up an operational presence on Cathara Station in the last 6 days. The notice informed me that effective immediately, the Cinder Lane's docking authorization was suspended, pending a full review of my entry documentation under the Undrath Succession's Unified Inspection Protocols. At the bottom of the notice, in very clean, precise language, it said, "Clearance exemptions previously extended to vessels of human registry are not recognized under Undrath Succession Customs Law and will not be honored, pending formal treaty review." I read it twice. Then I got up, made coffee, and read it a third time. The feeling at the back of my mind, which had been quiet and patient, did not change. It remained exactly as it had been, quiet, patient, present. But it was present in a different way now, the way a large animal is present when it is awake but has not moved yet. I went to the station concourse at 0415, when it was thin with the beings who operated on night cycles, or who had reasons to be out before the main rotation began. Scrix was already there. This did not surprise me. Scrix, I had learned, barely slept in any meaningful sense and used the quiet hours for its most detailed thinking. It had 4 new data pads. These were not the ones I had seen before. These were fresh, with new data, pulled recently. "You've seen it," I said. "I was notified at the same time you were," Scrix said. Its mandibles were doing something I had not seen them do before. They were very still, but not in the way of calm or careful consideration, in the way of something held carefully in check. "Tell me about the Undrath Succession," I said. "You already know the relevant history," Skrexrix said. "Present for the original blockade, Withdrew from galactic contact approximately 680 years ago, beginning to re-emerge in the last decade. It paused. What I can now add is this. The Undrath succession has been conducting what it terms a normalization program, a review of all legacy treaties and compact agreements that it considers binding from its period of isolation. Their position is that compacts, signed during their absence, without their participation, are not valid under their legal framework. They weren't absent, I said. They left. They withdrew. Their position, Scrix said carefully, is that their withdrawal was itself a response to an unstable and coercive galactic environment, and that agreements made during that period, under conditions they did not consent to, cannot be held to apply to them. And the Cathara Compact was signed while they were gone, I said. Yes. So they consider it non-binding. The clearance exemption, specifically, yes. Crix set down one datapad and picked up another. Their new authority here is headed by an individual called Admiral Ven-Ur. He is young by Undrath standards, very committed to what his government is calling legal rationalization. He has been publicly vocal about the exemption, describing it as an irrational legacy policy with no transparent legal basis. He's not wrong that there's no transparent basis, I said. No, Scrix said. He is not wrong about that. I looked at the observation port. Outside, the Vorathi dreadnought was still there. It had cleared its documentation hold about 6 hours after my visit to Gurthan. I did not think that was a coincidence, but I had not asked, and Gurthan had not said. The dreadnought's running lights were on. It was watching. Where is Ven-Ur now? I asked. He established an office on the commercial administration level, Scrix said. He has been meeting with station administrative staff since yesterday morning. And Latch 7? I said. Scrix paused. Latch 7 has been quiet since our visit to the archive room. Its public response systems are functioning normally, but several station administrators have noted that it has not initiated any communications since approximately the same time that Ven-Ur's authority filed its notice to you. I drank my coffee. It was not good coffee. The concourse establishment made it too hot and held it too long, and the result was something that tasted like very warm disappointment. But I drank it because it was something to do with my hands while I thought. I'm going to talk to him, I said. Scrix was quiet for a moment. Then it said, I would like to go with you. I looked at it. Why? Because I have spent 30 years asking why humans receive preferential treatment, it said, and its mandibles were moving now in a way I had come to recognize as honesty, not performance. And I believe that if something happens here, I would like to have been present, for the record. We found Ven-Ur's temporary office without difficulty. It was on the commercial level, in a suite that had been vacated by a trade delegation that had apparently decided to conclude their business early and leave. The Undrath succession's colors were displayed outside the door. I did not know the colors well, but I recognized them from historical records. Ven-Ur himself opened the door. He was not what I had expected. He was younger than I had imagined, physically. The Undrath were a tall species, long-limbed, with a quality of controlled precision in their movement that suggested extensive training. He had a sharp, careful face and eyes that processed me very quickly in a way that was not rude, but was not warm. Elara Voss, he said. I was informed you might come. By who? I asked. The station AI noted your departure from the concourse and flagged your likely destination, he said. It has been very attentive this morning. We came inside. The office was neat. Everything in a place. Ven-Ur sat behind the desk, and I sat across from it, and Scrix positioned itself equidistant from every wall, which Ven-Ur noted with a brief flicker of attention, and then let go. I received your notice, I said. I sent it to all humans, currently docked at Cathara, he said. There are 7 of you. I know, I said. I want to be clear that this is a legal matter, he said. He had a precise way of speaking, each word arriving in the correct place. The Cathara Compact's clearance exemption has never been legally substantiated. The original document has been sealed from public review. No independent legal body has been permitted to examine its provisions. This is not how interspecies law functions. Every entity operating in galactic space has the right to know the legal basis on which it is operating. That's fair, I said. He paused. He had expected me to argue. You're not wrong about the transparency problem, I said. I've been trying to find the document for 2 days and I can't access it either. Then you understand my position, he said. I understand it, I said. I'm also telling you, as clearly as I can, that you might want to reconsider the notice. Van studied me with those quick, careful eyes. On what basis? I don't know the full basis, I said. That's the honest answer. I know what I was told by a Varathi captain who has access to his species' oldest records. I know that the exemption exists because of something that happened 700 years ago, and that the 17 species who signed the compact decided the reason for the exemption was sufficient enough that the document did not need to be explained publicly, which is unacceptable, Van said. Which might be unacceptable, I said, or it might be prudent. Those aren't always different things. He looked at me for a long moment. You are a freight pilot, he said. Yes. You transport cargo between systems. Yes. You have no diplomatic authority. None at all. Then why, he said, with the tone of someone who has remained professional for a long time and is staying that way deliberately, should I take your words as anything other than the personal concern of an individual whose travel privilege is being reviewed? I thought about what to say. I thought about Gurthan's voice and the amber drink and the precise words he had used. I thought about the sealed archive and Earth, direct authority. I thought about the feeling at the back of my mind, which had not done anything and was not doing anything, but which was more present than it had been since I woke up. Because, I said, I'm not asking you to do this for me. I'm asking you to do it because the last group of people who created a situation like this found their ship somewhere else the next morning and spent the next 7 centuries being very careful. Venner's expression did not change much, but something in his eyes shifted. That story, he said, is 700 years old. Yes, I said. There is no evidence it was anything other than a natural phenomenon that was misunderstood and mythologized, he said. Our scientists have reviewed the records extensively. I know, I said. You might be right. I leaned back in my chair. But the people who signed the compact also had scientists, I said. And they still signed it. And they still sealed the archive. And the station AI that has run this facility for centuries has never, in all that time, processed a clearance denial for a human. Not once. And when your notice arrived at my unit this morning, Latch 7 went quiet. I paused. That's not evidence of anything. I know that. I'm not saying it is. I'm just asking you to think about what it might cost to find out. The office was very quiet. Outside, somewhere, the Varathi dreadnought's sensors were pointed at Kethera, watching. And at the back of my mind, something patient and very, very old was awake, and waiting, and doing nothing at all. Venner looked at me for a long time. Then he looked past me, at the wall, and his expression changed into something that I recognized as the face of a person doing very hard thinking very quickly. I waited. The lights in the office flickered, not dramatically, not in the way of a power failure, just once, briefly, like a breath. Every display in the room, Venner's desk unit, the data screens on the wall, every one of them went to a single line of text, not in any language I recognized, not in Galactic Common, in something much older. Then the displays came back to normal. Venner looked at his desk screen, then at the displays, then at me. His voice was very controlled when he spoke. And what language was that? He said. I don't know, I said, honestly. He looked at the blank desk screen for another long moment. Then he picked up his communication unit and made a call. He spoke quietly, in his own language. I heard my name and the word notice, and then something I could not follow. He put the unit down. The notice has been withdrawn, he said, pending further internal review. I stood up. Thank you, I said. He did not respond to that. He was looking at his desk screen again, and whatever he was feeling was not something his professional manner was quite managing to cover anymore. Scrix and I walked out together. In the corridor, Scrix said very quietly, the displays changed. Yes, I said. Did you do that? I thought about the feeling at the back of my mind, the thing that was quiet and patient, and had been awake since this morning, and had not done a single thing that I had chosen to do. I don't think so, I said. But you are not certain, Scrix said. No, I said. I'm not certain. We walked back to the concourse in silence, and I thought that uncertain was probably the most honest thing I could say about most of this. The notice was withdrawn before the morning rotation ended. Venner filed a formal internal memorandum to the Undrath Succession's diplomatic office, citing, and I read the summary version that came through the public administrative log, because someone on the station administration team had apparently decided it should be public. Unresolved jurisdictional ambiguities in the proposed review framework. That was a careful, professional way to say that he had looked at whatever had appeared on those displays and decided that the cost of finding out what it meant was not a cost he was willing to charge to himself. I did not feel triumphant about this. I want to be clear about that. What I felt was something considerably more complicated and considerably quieter. I found Scrix on the concourse at midday. It was standing at the observation port, which was where I had increasingly found it when it was not in motion. It was watching the space outside the station, where the dreadnought's running lights moved slow and steady. Gurathan has requested a meeting with the Administrative Council, Scrix said when I came to stand beside it. He transmitted the request this morning, specifically a meeting about the Cathara Compact's provisions and the question of new galactic parties who were not present at the time of signing. He wants to formalize something, I said. He wants to make sure what almost happened does not almost happen again, Scrix said, which I think is wise. I watched the dreadnought for a moment. Scrix, I said, what are you going to do with your 30 years of filings? Scrix was quiet for a long moment. All 11 mandibles were still. I am going to delete them, it said. I looked at it. Why? Because I understand now what I was doing, it said. I believed I was filing a protest against an unjust exemption, a bureaucratic challenge to an unexplained privilege. I believed I was acting in service of equal treatment and legal transparency. It paused. But I was not doing those things, not really. I was pulling at a thread that many very old, very intelligent species had decided very carefully not to pull, and the reason they had decided not to pull it was not bureaucratic laziness or political protection. It was because they had learned, once, what the thread was attached to. I did not say anything. 30 years of inquiries, Scrix said. 412 formal filings. I was not pursuing justice. I was, without knowing it, assembling a provocation. It was quiet for a moment. I am grateful that I am the one who found the answer, and not someone who would have done something with it. We stood at the observation port for a while. The dreadnought's lights moved. The station turned. I need to tell you something, I said, about what happened in Venner's office. The displays. You don't know what it was, Scrix said. I don't know what it was, I agreed. I don't know if I did something, or if something that is somehow part of me did something, or if it was a coincidence, or a system error, or something else entirely. I genuinely don't know. Skokrix made the sound I had never had a translation for, the one it had made in the archive room when Latch 7 had spoken. That is the most frightening thing about this, it said. Not that something acted, that even you don't know. I nodded. I called my mother last night, I said. She grows tomatoes. She had never heard of Earth, direct authority. Scrix looked at me. What do you think that means? I think it means that whatever is in us, if anything is in us, it is not something we are aware of carrying, I said. It is not a weapon that a government built and gave us. It is not something we trained for, or inherited knowingly, or have any relationship to, that we can point to. It is just, I stopped. It is just there, somewhere, in all of us, quiet, and apparently, very patient. Latch 7's voice came from the observation area's public speaker, not directed at me specifically, just present, the way the station AI sometimes was in public spaces. The Cinder Lane's departure corridor will be available beginning in 2 hours, it said. That was it. No context. No further communication. I looked at the speaker for a moment. Thank you, I said to the air. The speaker did not respond, but the observation area's lights, very briefly, warmed by a degree or two, then returned to normal. I went to find Gurathan one more time before I left. He was still aboard the dreadnought, still in the same ordered room, with the same viewport and the same amber drink. though this time he poured without being asked. "You spoke to him," he said. "I did," I said. "And now the notice is withdrawn." "Yes." He looked at his cup. "Did something happen?" "The displays in his office changed," I said. "One line of text. I don't know the language." Gurthan was quiet. Then he said, "In the Varathi record of the Quiet Month, there is an account from one of the ship captains who was present when the blockade vessels were relocated. He filed a report immediately on returning to Varathi space. In that report, he described a brief visual phenomenon, a single line of text appearing across every display on every ship simultaneously, just before they found themselves in a different location. He stated that no one on board recognized the language. I held my cup. He spent the rest of his life, Gurthan said, attempting to identify it. He never succeeded. I sat with that for a while. The stars outside the viewport were exactly what stars always were, cold and bright and enormously far away, and utterly indifferent to everything happening in front of them. "I want to ask you one more thing," I said. Gurthan nodded. "In 700 years, I said, has anyone from your species ever asked a human about this, directly?" He paused. Then he said, "No." "Why not?" He thought about how to answer. He took his time. "Because," he said finally, "if a human knows, and knowing changes something, then we have done a thing we cannot undo. And if a human does not know, which is what most of our analysts have always believed, then telling them is giving them information about themselves that we have no right to give, and no idea what they might do with it." He paused. "And so we have waited. For 700 years we have been polite and careful, and made sure the doors were open, and the paths were clear, and no one put anything in the way of a human who was moving through the galaxy." "Politely," I said. "Extremely politely," he said. "Yes." I finished my drink. I stood up. "For what it is worth," I said, "I still don't know. I have spent 2 days digging and asking and sitting in sealed archives, and I know more than I did before, and I understand the shape of it, but I do not know what happened during the Quiet Month. I do not know what moved your ships. I do not know what appeared on those displays. I do not know what Earth, direct authority is or was. I don't know if it is something in all of us, or something in one of us, or something that is simply present when the conditions are right." Gurthan looked at me steadily. "Neither do we," he said. "After 700 years, neither do we." I went back to Kithara. I finished my cargo documentation. I settled my docking fees, which were modest, because my permit rate had not changed, and no one had altered my registered status. I found Skay Crix one last time at the docking tube. It had all 4 data pads, but they were blank now. All 4 screens dark. "I have something for you," it said. It held out one of the pads. On it was a single document. Not a filing or an inquiry, a research summary. Every fragment it had found over 30 years, organized cleanly, with sources and dates and cross-references. Everything it knew, compiled for the first time into one place. "Why are you giving me this?" I said. "Because you are the first human in 30 years who has asked why the door is open," Scrix said. "And I think that matters. And because whatever you are, all of you, it seems to me that you should have access to at least some of the things that the rest of the galaxy knows about you." I took the data pad. "What will you do now?" I asked. "Continue my work," Scrix said. "Trade compliance. There is always more trade and always more compliance required." It arranged its mandibles in the way I had come to read as a kind of careful warmth. "But I may file fewer inquiries about this particular matter." I boarded the Cinder Lane. The departure corridor was clear, as Latch 7 had said it would be. The docking arm released smoothly, and the Cinder Lane moved into the approach lane without any instruction from me. Not because I was not piloting, but because the station's guidance was already in place, already moving me gently in the right direction, making sure the path was open. On the station's external comms channel, which I kept open during departure, I heard the Charathi merchant receive its docking confirmation. 24 hours after submitting documentation, I heard the elegant ship that I still had not identified receive its approach clearance. I heard the Undrath Succession Authority request a communications window with the station administration, which was granted. None of that was about me. The galaxy was going about its business. I turned on some music, old music, from Earth, the kind my mother played when she was working in the garden. I pointed the cinder lane toward the jump corridor and let the autopilot pick up the heading. The stars were the same as they always were. I pulled up the datapad Skonkrix had given me and looked at the summary for a while. Then I put it down and looked at the viewport instead. I thought about what Gurthan had said, that the scariest part was not what had happened during the quiet month. It was that it had only needed to happen once, and in 660 years since, with humans moving freely through the galaxy, trading and traveling and arguing and exploring and being generally themselves, that thing, whatever it was, had never needed to act again. Not because nothing had ever bothered us. Things had bothered us constantly. We were a species that was bothered by things on an almost continuous basis. But nothing in 6 centuries had risen to the level of that first, original provocation. Nothing had crossed whatever line it was that existed somewhere inside the species, in a place we could not point to, and a language none of us could read. And so it had waited, and the galaxy had been very polite, and the doors had stayed open. I passed the outer marker of Cathara's traffic zone, and the guidance system released me to open space. The cinder lane settled into its own rhythm, that particular combination of engine hum and hull vibration that I knew as well as my own heartbeat. I set a course for my next delivery. Food supplements and spare parts, and 2 crates of agricultural equipment for a colony on the far side of the system. Ordinary work. The kind of work that most of my life was made of. The feeling at the back of my mind was quiet again. Present, as it always was now that I was aware of it. But quiet. Not sleeping, I thought. That was not quite the right word. Waiting, maybe. Or perhaps just resting. The way something rests when it has been awake recently and is content to be still for now, because the situation no longer requires it to be otherwise. I thought about calling my mother, not about any of this, just to talk, about tomatoes and neighbors, and the ordinary weight of an ordinary life on an ordinary planet. I thought that sounded exactly right. The music played. The cinder lane moved through the dark. Cathara fell away behind me, its lights diminishing to a point, and then to nothing. And ahead, there was only the clean and empty space between here and the next place. The galaxy lets humans go wherever they want. No questions, no forms, no waiting, no red lights that stay red. Just open doors and extended docking arms and 1,000 small courtesies extended by 1,000 different species who have all learned, in one way or another, the same old lesson. I used to think that was luck. Then I thought it was privilege. Then I thought it was something stranger than either of those words. Now I think it is the oldest and most carefully maintained warning sign in the galaxy, built over 7 centuries by 17 species, and upheld by every being that knows the history. And we are the thing it is warning about, and we do not remember why, and that is precisely the point. The jump corridor opened ahead of me. I flew into it without asking anyone's permission. Nobody asked me to. Nobody ever does.